The winter air bit harder than usual that morning, not with snow or wind, but with a kind of quiet that made everything feel slower, heavier. I'd parked my truck in the gravel lot outside the Cedar Ridge Animal Shelter just after 9, the engine ticking as it cooled, my boots crunching over frozen patches of mud. I wasn't supposed to be here, not really. Not yet, anyway. But my brother had called the night before, his voice softer than I'd heard it in years. "You're ready," he'd said. No question. Just a statement, like he'd been watching me heal from a distance and finally saw a crack of light breaking through. I hadn't corrected him. I hadn't said, 2 years isn't enough. Or, Rusty was one of a kind. Or, what if I can't love another dog the same way? Because in truth, I was tired. Tired of the silence in the house, tired of setting out 1 coffee cup instead of 2, tired of catching glimpses of golden fur in the corner of my eye that never turned into anything real. So I came. The shelter smelled like all shelters do, bleach and old carpet and warm fur, but underneath it all, something deeper, hope, worn thin. I'd volunteered here off and on over the last decade. Mostly during the summer months, when the puppies flooded in and the staff ran on fumes and goodwill. I knew the rhythms, the barking chorus at feeding time, the quiet hum of the laundry room, the way the older dogs would press against their kennel doors just to feel a hand brush past. But today, I wasn't here to scoop kibble or clean runs. Today, I was here to look. I walked past the front desk. Carol from Adoptions waved but didn't stop me. She knew the look, and headed down the main hallway. The left side held the dogs who'd just come in, scared, bouncy, some still wearing flea collars from whoever dropped them off. The right side, that was different. That was where they kept the ones nobody asked about. By the time I reached Kennel 19, my hands were in my pockets and my breath was fogging in front of me like I'd stepped into a freezer. I stopped. There he was. Not pacing. Not whining. Not even looking at the door. Just sitting, spine straight, ears slightly feathered with age, his coat a storm of grays, tans, and dust. He looked like someone had tried to knit a dog out of old rope and forgotten to finish the seams. One eye cloudy, cataract probably, but the other was bright. Amber, almost gold, fixed on me with a kind of focused curiosity I hadn't seen since Rusty's last summer. I crouched. "Hey," I said, voice low. "You doing okay in there?" Nothing. Not a tail wag, not a blink, not a shift in weight. Just watching. Behind me, the squeak of a mop bucket. A woman in blue scrubs paused, her brow lifting. "You talking to 19? "Yeah," I said, still looking at the dog. "What's his story?" She leaned on the mop handle. "No story. That's the problem. Came in 3 months ago, owner passed away, neighbor found him chained to a porch. No chip. No papers. Just him. And that tag." I squinted. There was a tag, brass, round, worn like an old coin. Not the plastic rectangle most dogs wore. "What's it say?" She shook her head. "We never read it. But it's the only reason we haven't, you know." The sentence trailed off, but I heard it anyway. "Put him down." My stomach dropped like a stone. "Different," she added, as if that explained everything. And in a way it did. In shelter lingo, different didn't mean quirky or special. It meant hard to place. Too old. Too quiet. Too set in his ways. The kind of dog people passed by because he didn't leap at the bars with hopeful eyes or wag like his life depended on it. And yet, something in me leaned forward. I stepped closer, ignoring the warning voice in my head that said, "You're not ready. You don't want complications." This dog wasn't complicated. He was contained. Like he'd already decided the world was too loud, and he'd rather wait it out. "What's his name?" I asked. "Tag just says Reggie." I almost laughed. Reggie? It didn't fit. Sounded like a cartoon squirrel, or a kid who sold lemonade. This dog had gravity. History. He looked like he'd once guarded a gate or sat beside someone during thunderstorms or watched sunrises from a porch swing that no longer existed. But names stick. Maybe that's all they ever are, sounds we attach to souls until they answer to them. I'll give you a minute, the staff member said, pushing her mop cart down the hall. I stayed crouched. The other dogs were barking now, bored, excited, frustrated, but Kennel 19 was silent. I met his amber eye. Held it. And then I saw it again, the brass tag, catching the fluorescent light. I pulled out my phone, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it through the chain link. Letters, faint but legible, etched into the metal. If you're reading this, I was loved once. I felt it in my chest before my brain caught up, a punch of grief and tenderness so sharp I had to swallow twice. Who wrote that? A child? A grandfather? A wife saying goodbye to her husband's dog after he died. Whoever it was, they'd known this dog might end up lost. Might end up forgotten. And they'd given him a way to speak when he couldn't bark. You're still loved, I whispered. He blinked. Once. Slow. Then, miracle of miracles, his tail gave the softest thump against the concrete floor. I stood up, my knees cracking like old floorboards. Okay, Reggie, I said. Let's get you out of here. When the staffer returned with the keys, she looked skeptical. You sure about this one? He hasn't barked once since he got here. Barely eats unless you hand-feed him. I'm sure. She unlocked the kennel. The door groaned open. Reggie didn't bolt. Didn't flinch. He rose slowly, joints creaking like an old house settling, and stepped out like a man who'd been told his parole had come through. He stood beside me, calm as church on a Tuesday morning. I reached down, hand hovering over his matted head. He didn't move. I rested my palm gently on top of his skull. Underneath the tangles, his fur was surprisingly soft, warm, like sun-baked earth. And then, so faint I almost missed it, his tail wagged again. Not for show. Not for treats. Just acknowledgement. Outside, the winter sun was high and clean, turning the world into something sharper, clearer. I opened the passenger door of my truck. Up you go. He looked at the seat. Looked at me. Hesitated. You're not heavy. I said, maybe to him, maybe to myself. And I've lifted heavier. He stepped up like he'd done it 1,000 times. Settled into the seat, curled into a tight half-moon. His breathing was slow, rhythmic, the only sound in the cab. The drive home was silent except for that breath, and the hum of tires on asphalt, and the occasional sigh from the heater. I kept glancing over, half expecting him to panic, to whine, to try to jump out. But he just watched the trees go by, his cloudy eye catching the light like old glass. At the house, he did a slow circuit of the living room, sniffed the baseboards, the couch legs, the door frames. Then he stopped in front of Rusty's bed. I'd kept it. Cleaned it every month. Told myself I'd donate it. When the time was right. You can have it, I said. He circled once. Twice. Then laid down with a sigh that sounded like it carried decades. I sat on the couch, unsure what came next. Adoption isn't like in the movies. There's no instant bond, no dramatic music. Just two beings in a room, figuring out if they can share the same air without breaking. But the room did feel different. Not lighter, Rusty's absence was still a presence, but warmer. Like someone had turned on a pilot light in a cold stove. That night, Reggie didn't bark. Didn't whine at the door. Just slept curled tight, one paw tucked under his chin like he was holding on to something precious. The next morning, I made eggs. He didn't beg. Just sat by the kitchen door and waited, ears perked, eyes half-lidded with patience. You're polite, I said, sliding a plain bite onto a small plate. I'll give you that. His ears twitched. Days passed. Each one less quiet than the last. He started following me from room to room, not clinging, just present. Sat outside the bathroom. Waited by the garage. Walked on the leash without pulling, like he understood space was something to be respected. One morning, I gave him a proper bath. The water ran brown at first, dirt, grease, time. But underneath, his coat was a rich golden brown, streaked with white like sea foam. He looked 10 pounds lighter. Younger. Still not a Reggie, but closer to himself. The vet confirmed what I suspected. He was old, maybe 10, maybe 12. Arthritic in the hips. Missing a molar. But his heart was strong. His lungs clear. He's been through something, she said, running her hands over his spine. But he's healthy. As healthy as any senior mutt can be. So I started buying joint chews. A raised food bowl. A heating pad for the floor near my desk. Small things. Quiet investments. And still, he didn't bark. Not once. Until one night, weeks later, I dug through a box of Rusty's things. Photos, mostly. A worn tennis ball. I rolled it across the floor, more out of habit than hope. Reggie watched it go. Then looked at me. Walked over. Nudged it back with his nose. It was the first time I laughed out loud in months. He wagged his tail. Did it again. A week after that, we went to the park. I sat on our usual bench. He lay at my feet, eyes tracking pigeons like they owed him money. A young couple walked by with a toddler holding an ice cream cone. The kid tripped. Dropped it. Started wailing. Reggie stood. Walked over. Sat in front of the child. And gently, deliberately, licked the melted ice cream off the pavement. The crying stopped. The mom smiled. He's got good manners. I nodded. He's got a good heart. That night, I reached for his tag again. Read the words under my breath. If you're reading this, I was loved once. I added softly. You still are. He rested his head on my foot. I didn't move for a long time. The next morning, I called the shelter. Told them I wanted to cover adoption fees for the next 3 senior dogs. Because of Reggie? The staffer asked. Because someone loved him enough to leave that message, I said. And now it's my turn. She was quiet for a moment. Then, we just got a 12-year-old beagle in. No tag. No name. Think someone like you will come for him too? I hope so, I said. I really hope so. That night, on the porch, Reggie snored softly beside me, one paw twitching in his sleep, chasing rabbits, maybe, or memories. I ran a hand through his fur, felt the old brass tag against my fingers. Loved once. Now loved again. And that was just the beginning. The first weeks, silence, trust, and a bath that changed everything. The first night after bringing Reggie home wasn't dramatic. There were no thunderstorms, no howling at the moon, no panic circling or refusal to settle. Just quiet, deep, patient quiet, and the soft sound of an old dog sighing into a bed that had once belonged to another. I sat on the couch long after the house should have felt dark, listening. Not for noise, but for absence. Rusty had always been a noisy sleeper, snorts, whimpers, the occasional dream chase that ended with a thud against the wall. Reggie didn't do any of that. He simply lay still, his breathing slow and even, like a clock ticking off the seconds of a life that had seen too much to waste energy on theatrics. I hadn't planned to stay up. But something kept me rooted there, one hand dangling over the armrest, the other wrapped around a mug of cold coffee I hadn't meant to finish. It felt wrong to go to bed and leave him alone in the living room, even though he was clearly used to solitude. So I waited. And eventually, exhaustion pulled me under. When I woke at dawn, the house was bathed in that soft gray light that comes just before sunrise, thin, hopeful, forgiving. Reggie was still in Rusty's bed. But his head was lifted, ears alert, eyes fixed on the kitchen doorway. Not with fear. Not with suspicion. Just readiness. Morning, I said, voice gravelly from sleep. He didn't move, but his tail gave a single, quiet thump against the cushion. I padded to the kitchen, the floorboards groaning under my weight the way they always did in winter. I filled the kettle, grabbed eggs from the fridge, set a pan on the stove. Behind me, I heard soft paws on hardwood. Not running. Not demanding. Just arriving. He stood in the kitchen doorway, perfectly still, watching me like I was performing a ritual he'd seen before but never quite understood. You hungry? I asked. No answer, of course. but his eyes flicked toward the counter. I cracked 2 eggs into the pan, stirred them gently, then scooped a plain spoonful onto a small ceramic plate. I placed it on the floor near his feet. He didn't lunge. Didn't even lean forward right away. He just looked at the food, then at me, as if checking for hidden conditions. Go ahead, I said. No tricks. He lowered his head slowly, sniffed once, twice, and then ate with quiet precision, like every bite mattered. You're polite, I said, leaning against the counter. I'll give you that. His ears twitched. Not in response to my words, maybe, but to the tone. To the fact that someone was speaking to him like he was worth listening to. That became our rhythm, mornings of eggs and silence, afternoons of slow walks around the cul-de-sac, evenings of shared space on the couch while I pretended to watch documentaries and really just watched him. He didn't follow me like Rusty used to, bouncing ahead, doubling back, nudging my hand for attention. Reggie followed like a shadow. Not attached, but present. If I went to the bathroom, he sat outside the door. If I worked at my desk, he lay just beyond the desk leg, close enough to touch but far enough not to intrude. It was as if he'd mastered the art of companionship without burden. But there was one thing I couldn't ignore: his coat. It wasn't just dirty. It was a map of neglect. Mats the size of my fist clung to his haunches. Grease and grime had seeped into his undercoat, turning patches of fur brittle and dull. He smelled like old hay and damp earth, and something faintly metallic, like the hinges of a forgotten gate. You need a bath, I said one Tuesday morning, standing over him in the backyard where he'd been sunning himself on the porch step. He looked up, one amber eye gleaming, the other clouded but watchful. I'm not asking, I added. He sighed, a sound so human it startled me, and rose slowly, joints creaking like floorboards in an empty house. The tub was old, clawfoot, enamel chipped at the edges. I ran warm water, not hot, testing it with my wrist like I used to do for Rusty. Reggie stood at the bathroom door, hesitant for the first time since I'd brought him home. It's okay, I said. Just water. No surprises. He stepped in with the caution of someone who'd been betrayed by something as simple as a puddle before. I wet his fur gently, working my fingers through the worst of the tangles. At first, he flinched, just a twitch of the shoulder, a flick of the ear, but didn't pull away. So I kept going, slower, using my palms instead of nails, letting the suds do the work. Underneath the grime, his fur was a rich golden brown, streaked with white like sea foam. His skin, once hidden, was healthy, pink in places, tan in others, but free of sores or parasites. Whoever had left him on that porch hadn't abused him physically. Just abandoned him emotionally. That's better, I murmured as I rinsed the last of the soap. He shook once, softly, politely, and water droplets sprayed the tiles like morning dew. I wrapped him in the biggest towel I owned, the one with the frayed edges that Rusty had loved to burrow into. Reggie leaned into the rub, not fighting, just accepting. When I stopped, he looked at me, not with gratitude exactly, but with something deeper. Recognition. You're not a Reggie, I said, half to myself. He blinked. You're something else. Something older. Something that's seen storms and outlasted them. I dried him thoroughly, then combed what remained of the mats with a wide-toothed brush. Each stroke seemed to lift a layer of weight from his shoulders. By the time we were done, he looked 10 pounds lighter, and 10 years younger. That night, for the first time, he didn't sleep in Rusty's bed. He lay on the rug beside my desk, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed but alert. As if to say, I'm staying close tonight, just to be sure. The next morning, I called the vet. Dr. Penfield had been Rusty's vet too. She'd cried with me when he passed. When I told her I'd adopted an older dog, she didn't ask why. Just said, bring him in. I'll clear the 10 a.m. slot. The clinic was quiet that day, no yapping puppies, no nervous cats and carriers. Reggie walked in like he owned the place, tail low but steady, head high. The receptionist didn't even flinch. That's the shelter dog, isn't it? She said. The one with the brass tag. Word traveled fast in a town this size. Dr. Penfield met us in the exam room herself. She didn't reach for him right away. Just knelt, hands in her lap, and spoke softly. "Hey, Reggie. You made it." He sat without being asked. She ran her hands over his spine, pressed gently on his hips, checked his gums, lifted his paws one by one. "He's arthritic," she said. "Mild, manageable. One molar's gone, old age. Eyes are mismatched, but the cloudy one is cataract, not pain. Heart strong. Lungs are clear." She paused, looking at me. "He's been through something. Not cruelty, but loss. Profound loss." I nodded. "His tag said if you're reading this, I was loved once." Her eyes softened. "Then someone gave him the best gift they could, a way to be found." She prescribed joint supplements, recommended a raised food bowl, and suggested a heating pad for cold nights. "He doesn't need fixing," she said. "He just needs time. And someone who sees him." On the drive home, Reggie rested his head on the passenger window, watching the world blur past. Sunlight caught the brass tag around his neck, making it glow like a tiny sun. That night, I dug through the garage. Not because I was looking for anything specific, but because grief has a way of making you restless, and sometimes the only antidote is physical motion. Boxes lined the walls, Rusty's things, mostly. Leashes. Toys. A raincoat that never quite fit right. And then, tucked beneath a tarp in the corner, the old therapy vest. I'd forgotten about it. It was faded blue, the white letters barely legible, therapy dog, Rusty. I held it in my hands, feeling the weight of memory. We'd visited nursing homes together, back when I thought volunteering would stitch my heart back together. It hadn't, not fully. But it had kept me moving. Reggie padded into the garage behind me, silent as always. "You ever want a job?" I asked, holding up the vest. He sniffed it once, just once, and sat down. Not out of interest. Not out of curiosity. But out of respect. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just about me needing a dog. This was about him needing a purpose. I didn't sign him up that night. Didn't rush into anything. But I started looking. Found the local therapy dog program online, same one Rusty and I had used. They offered orientations every other month. I filled out the form, saved it as a draft, and closed the browser. Reggie lay by my feet, head on my socked foot, breathing slow and steady. Days passed. The silence between us grew comfortable, not empty. He started watching me when I read. Not with neediness, but with quiet companionship. He'd rest his chin on my knee during coffee, not asking for anything, just sharing the moment. One afternoon, we walked down M Street. The snow had finally melted, revealing cracked sidewalks and patches of stubborn ice. Spring was teasing us, warm one day, frosty the next. Near the coffee shop, a girl sat on a bench, tears streaking her cheeks. She couldn't have been more than 10. Her backpack lay open beside her, notebooks spilling into slush. I tightened Reggie's leash, ready to steer us clear. But he pulled. Not hard. Just enough to let me know he wasn't stopping by accident. "Hey," I said gently, trying to ease him back. The girl looked up. And Reggie stopped. He just stood there, ears forward, tail still, eyes locked on her like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. She stared at him. Then slowly reached out her hand. Reggie stepped forward, one paw, then another, until he was close enough for her to touch. She ran her fingers along his head, carefully, like she wasn't sure he was real. "He's not scared of me," she whispered. "Not one bit," I said. She looked down. "Most dogs don't like me. I move too fast. That's what my mom says." "Reggie's a slow guy," I said. "He likes quiet. And he's good at sitting still." She smiled, just barely. We stood there until her mother came running around the corner, face pale with worry. "Emily!" she called. "I'm here," the girl said. Her mom knelt, wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and looked at me. He's friendly? I nodded. She gets overwhelmed sometimes. I get that, I said. Emily gave Reggie one last scratch behind the ears. Bye, Reggie. He wagged his tail once as they walked off. I felt him lean into my leg. Yeah, I said, scratching the top of his head. You're a therapy dog whether you like it or not. That night, I opened the draft email. I didn't submit it. Not yet. But I read the requirements again. Temperament test. Health clearance. Handler training. Basic obedience, though Reggie already obeyed without being told. I looked at him, curled on the rug, chewing slowly on a rawhide bone. You ready for this? I asked. He paused. Looked at me. Dropped the bone. Then, for the first time since I'd brought him home, he rested his head in my lap. I didn't move. Didn't breathe too loudly. Just let the moment settle like dust in sunlight. We stayed like that until the ice in my glass melted. The next morning, I called the shelter. Do you still have Reggie's intake records? I asked. Not much, the director said. Just what was on the tag. Can I see it? The tag, you have it? We never looked at the back. I checked. The reverse side was nearly worn smooth, but under the right light, faint scratches formed letters. Not far. An address. 20 miles west. He's got a history. I told Reggie that night, though he probably didn't understand. We're going on a road trip tomorrow. He lifted his head just to see. Nothing more. The next morning, we drove past town limits, through winding back roads and fields still dusted with frost. The address led to a farmhouse, weathered but cared for, smoke curling from the chimney. A man in his 70s stepped onto the porch, leaning on a cane. I got out slowly. Sorry to bother you. I adopted a dog a while back. Found your address on his old tag. The man's face didn't change at first. He's got one cloudy eye. Shaggy coat. Answers to Reggie. The man stepped forward. You brought him? He's in the truck. The man walked closer. I opened the door. Reggie sat watching. Then the old man said one word. Tucker. And Reggie whined, not a sad sound, not scared. Just recognition. He stepped out, walked up to the man, sniffed his shoes, and leaned against his leg. The man dropped his cane. Didn't fall, just knelt, both hands in Reggie's fur. He was my son's, he said. We stayed a while. Talked. He gave me a photo of Tucker and his son, both smiling, arms around each other. On the drive home, Reggie didn't seem confused. Didn't seem torn. Just tired. He curled up in his bed that night and slept like he hadn't in weeks. I looked at the photo. You were loved, I said softly. He opened one eye and wagged his tail. The next day, I submitted the therapy dog application. His second act was about to begin. But before that, before libraries and nursing homes and children who couldn't speak, I had to learn what it meant to trust silence. Reggie never barked that first week. Not even when the garbage truck rumbled by at dawn. Not when thunder rolled in one night like distant drums. He just watched. Listened. Waited. And in that waiting, he taught me something I'd long forgotten, that presence is its own language. One evening, while brushing him again, his coat growing softer with each wash, I realized I hadn't thought about Rusty in hours. Not with guilt. Not with longing. Just absence. And in that space, something new had grown. Not a replacement. A continuation. I found myself talking to him, not at him, like some owners do, but with him. Telling him about my day, my worries, the weird dream I'd had. He never responded, not verbally. But he'd tilt his head. Lick my wrist. Press his side against my leg. It was enough. More than enough. By the end of those first weeks, Reggie had stopped sleeping in the living room. He chose the hallway outside my bedroom door. Not inside. Not demanding entry. Just close enough to know I was there. And I, in turn, left my door cracked open. No words needed. Just two souls learning to share the same quiet. The first walk to the park, a child, an ice cream cone, and the moment Reggie spoke without barking. The park wasn't much, just a patch of green hemmed in by old oaks, a rusted swing set, and a pond that froze over by December. But to Reggie, it might as well have been a cathedral. We'd been walking for weeks by then, but always around the neighborhood, slow circuits past mailboxes and hydrangeas, past porch lights flickering on at dusk. But that Saturday morning, something shifted. When I clipped on his leash, he didn't just stand by the door, he trotted ahead, tail lifted like a question mark, ears alert to the distant call of geese overhead. "You're ready, huh?" I asked, zipping my coat. He sneezed. I took it as a yes. The drive was quiet, as it always was with Reggie. No panting, no whining, just the rhythmic rise and fall of his breath and the occasional thump of his tail against the seat when we passed a field or a dog-shaped shadow in the trees. He'd learned the route by now, the turn onto Elm, the bump in the road near the bakery, the way the trucks slowed when we neared open space. But today felt different. Maybe it was the light, thin and golden, the kind that only comes in late fall, when the world has shed its summer noise and is learning how to listen again. Or maybe it was the way Reggie sat up straighter as we pulled into the gravel lot, his cloudy eye fixed on the trailhead like he recognized it. "You've been here before," I said, more statement than question. He didn't answer. But his ears flicked once. We walked along the edge of the pond first. The water was still, mirroring the sky so perfectly it looked like you could step into another world if you leaned too far. Reggie paused at the bank, nose twitching, and for a long moment, he just watched. Not sniffing. Not barking. Just remembering. I sat on the bench, the one with the chipped green paint and the nail that always caught my jeans, and patted the space beside me. Reggie didn't jump up. He circled once, then settled at my feet, head resting on my boot like it belonged there. A breeze rolled in, carrying the scent of wet leaves and distant wood smoke. I leaned back, let my eyes close for a second. That's when I heard it. A wail. Sharp, sudden, the kind only a toddler can produce when the world has gone horribly, unfairly wrong. I opened my eyes. A young couple stood 20 feet away, frozen in that awkward dance of new parenthood. The dad had a diaper bag slung over one shoulder and a half-eaten pretzel in his hand. The mom was crouched low, arms outstretched but not touching, her voice soft and pleading. The source of the storm was their son, maybe 3 years old, with tear-streaked cheeks and a puddle of melted ice cream dripping from his fist onto the pavement. "It's okay, baby," the mom kept saying. "We'll get another one." But to a child, that's not how loss works. That cone wasn't just sugar and sprinkles. It was joy, solidified. And now it was gone. I tightened Reggie's leash instinctively. "Come on, old man," I murmured. "Let's give them space." But Reggie didn't move. He lifted his head. Then, slowly, deliberately, he stood. "Hey," I said, tugging gently. "We're not." He took one step forward. Then another. Not pulling. Not lunging. Just walking with a kind of calm certainty that stopped me cold. The parents noticed him then. The mom's eyes widened. The dad straightened up, hand tightening on the diaper bag like he wasn't sure if this was a rescue or a threat. Reggie didn't look at them. He walked straight to the child. Stopped. Saturday. And then, without fanfare, without hesitation, he leaned down and licked the smear of vanilla and rainbow sprinkles off the concrete. The crying stopped. Not gradually. Not with hiccups or sniffles. Just stopped. The boy stared at Reggie like he just witnessed magic. Then, slowly, he reached out and touched Reggie's ear. Reggie didn't flinch. Didn't pull away. Just let the small fingers trace the soft fur, his amber eye steady, patient. "He's not scared of me," the boy whispered. The mom laughed, a shaky, relieved sound. "No, honey. I don't think he is." She looked at me then, really looked. Not as a stranger with a dog, but as someone who might understand. "He's got good manners," she said. I nodded. He's got a good heart. They stayed a moment longer, the boy petting Reggie, the parents watching with something like wonder. Before they walked off, the promise of a new ice cream cone hanging in the air like a peace treaty. When they were gone, Reggie turned and looked at me. Not proud. Not seeking praise. Just complete. I crouched down, scratched behind his ears. You didn't have to do that, you know. He blinked. But you did it anyway. He rested his head against my knee. We sat like that until the sun dipped below the tree line and the park emptied out. On the drive home, he didn't sleep. He watched the road, ears perked, like he was cataloging every. That night, I reached for his collar again. The brass tag caught the lamplight, warm and worn. If you're reading this, I was loved once. I traced the letters with my thumb. You still are, I whispered. He rested his head on my foot. And I didn't move for a long time. The next morning, I called the shelter. Not because I needed anything, but because I couldn't stop thinking about the way that little boy had looked at Reggie, not with fear, not with curiosity, but with recognition. Like he'd found a friend he didn't know he'd lost. I want to cover the adoption fees for the next 3 senior dogs, I told the director. There was a pause. Because of Reggie? Because someone loved him enough to leave that message, I said. And now it's my turn. She was quiet for a moment. Then, we just got a 12-year-old beagle in. No tag. No name. Think someone like you will come for him too? I hope so, I said. I really hope so. The park became our weekly ritual after that. Not because I planned it, but because Reggie made it clear every Saturday morning by standing by the door with his leash in his mouth, a habit he'd never shown before, not even with Rusty's old toys. We always took the same route, past the duck pond, around the old footbridge, then back along the gravel path that cut through the maple grove. Other dogs came and went, yappy terriers, bounding labs, nervous rescues on retractable leashes. But Reggie walked like he owned the silence between their barks. He didn't play. Didn't chase. Didn't even acknowledge most of them. But he always stopped at the bench. The one near the pond. And every time, he'd sit and stare at the water like he was waiting for someone to appear on the other side. I never asked who. But one afternoon, as we sat there, an older man in a flannel coat paused on the path. He had a poodle mix on a red leash and a look in his eyes that said he'd seen too many goodbyes. He's got boundaries, I said when the poodle tried to bound over and Reggie gave a low, soft growl, not threatening, just clear. The man smiled. That's rare. Most dogs his age get too soft. Not this one, I said. We talked for a few minutes, about the weather, the shelter, the way the ducks had been slow to migrate that year. Before he left, he said, You should come to the community event Saturday. Seniors are bringing their adopted dogs for a little meetup. It's nothing big. Just some folding chairs and coffee. He doesn't really like crowds, I said. Neither do most of the dogs, he replied. That's the point. Reggie was sitting taller when we got back to the truck, watching the door like he'd already made up his mind. We've got an invite, buddy, I said. You feel like being social this weekend? He sneezed. I took it as a maybe. Saturday came with frost on the windows and the distant rumble of salt trucks. I packed a thermos of coffee and an old quilt for the folding chairs. Reggie climbed into the truck like it was just another errand, but there was a new alertness in his posture, the way his ears turned toward every car that passed, the way his tail gave a soft wag when he spotted the rec center. The event was small, about a dozen people huddled in coats, holding leashes or tossing worn tennis balls to dogs who moved like they'd earned every ache in their bones. One dog rode in a custom wheelchair. Another had 3 legs and a swagger that said he didn't need the 4th. The man in the flannel coat waved us over. Glad you came. What's his name again? Reggie. He smiled. Looks better already. We stood together, making small talk, while Reggie sat quietly beside me, observing. He didn't approach anyone. Didn't beg for attention. But he didn't retreat either. He just existed in the space, calm and steady, like an anchor in a room full of drifting boats. One of the organizers handed me a Polaroid camera. Mind if we take a picture for the board? We're starting a wall of second chances. I looked at Reggie. Smile, old man. He didn't, of course. But he looked at the camera with that curious tilt of his head, the same one he'd given me in Kennel 19. They snapped the photo, wrote our names on the bottom, and clipped it to a corkboard under a sign that said, "Found each other." We didn't stay long. After half an hour, Reggie gave me a look, a slow blink, a shift of weight, that clearly meant, we're done here. On the way home, we stopped at the corner store. I let him pick a toy from the little rack by the register. He sniffed a rubber chicken, a plush squirrel, and finally settled on a stuffed star with a smiley face. I wasn't sure why. But he held it in his mouth all the way to the truck. That night, he lay on the rug, chewing the star slowly, not with excitement, more like he was savoring it. I poured myself a drink and sat down beside him. You know, I said, you could have ended up anywhere. And here we are. He paused. Looked up at me. Rusty's box, resurrecting a purpose from the past. Reggie didn't bark that night, not in the way people expected barks to sound. It wasn't loud or sharp or urgent. It was softer, almost accidental, a low, muffled woof that seemed to surprise even him. He looked up at me afterward like he knocked a glass off the counter and wasn't sure if he was in trouble. You've got a voice, I said, setting down my coffee. Took you long enough. It had been just over a month since I'd brought him home from Kennel 19. The silence that had once clung to him like a heavy coat had started to loosen at the edges. He made noises now, grunts when he settled onto his bed, soft puffs of breath when he watched squirrels from the porch, the occasional sigh that sounded like resignation. And now this. His first real attempt at a bark. I scratched under his chin. You're figuring it out, huh? He licked my wrist, then wandered to the window, one paw resting on the sill. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. Snow lined the curbs, the kind that stuck around without melting, soft and patient. I watched his tail sway slowly, like a metronome keeping time with a song only he could hear. I hadn't planned to keep calling him Reggie. It still didn't quite fit. Too cheerful, too cartoonish for this dog who moved through the world like a monk in a world of noise. But he'd started responding to it, in his own way. Not with leaps or exuberant yelps, but with a slow blink, a lifted ear, a shift in posture that said, I hear you, and I'm here. More importantly, he'd started responding to me. We'd built routines without planning them. Morning walks to the mailbox. Slow circuits around the cul-de-sac in the afternoons. Evening time on the couch, where he'd rest his head on my foot while I watched documentaries or read aloud from whatever book I'd pulled off the shelf. He didn't care about the plot. He cared about the rhythm of my voice, the warmth of shared space. And once a week, without fail, we drove to the park. That's where we were headed now. Come on, old man, I said, grabbing his leash. He trotted over, a little bounce in his step, a new development. I clipped the leash on, and he was already at the door before I'd zipped my coat. The truck ride was quiet, as usual. I talked about nothing important, the weather, a strange dream I'd had, the way the neighbor's cat kept leaving gifts on my welcome mat. Reggie listened, ears flicking occasionally, as if filing away every word for later. At the park, Reggie walked like he owned it. Not with pride, but with quiet confidence. He sniffed every bush like he was checking on tenants, gave a slow nod to other dogs like he recognized them from another life. Most ignored him. A few barked from a distance. One small white poodle mix tried to bound over, tail whipping like a windshield wiper on high speed. Reggie gave a short, low growl, not threatening, just clear. I'm not interested. He's got boundaries, I explained to the owner, a man in his 60s with a thick flannel coat and kind eyes. That's rare, the man replied, smiling. Most dogs his age get too soft. Not this one, I said. Reggie led me to the same bench we always stopped at, near the pond, where ducks huddled on the frozen surface like they'd forgotten how to fly south. He didn't sit right away. just stood, staring at the water, his cloudy eye catching the light like old glass. "You used to come here, didn't you?" I asked. He didn't look at me, but his ears flicked once. It was a hunch, but it felt true. The way he walked without hesitation, the way his shoulders relaxed the moment we passed the park gates, it was like he'd returned to a place that still held echoes of someone he'd loved. I sat down. Reggie finally did too, pressing his side against my leg like he was anchoring us both to the earth. We stayed like that until the cold started to seep through my jacket, and the sun dipped low enough to turn the ice on the pond into liquid gold. On the drive back, I stopped by the local hardware store, the kind with creaky floors and hand-painted signs that said, "Nails 10 cents a pound," in peeling letters. I needed some brackets for the porch steps, but I figured I'd let Reggie have his say about the place. "Stay," I told him, cracking the window a bit. He stayed. Didn't bark. Didn't whine. Just watched the world go by like a sentry on duty. Inside, the clerk recognized me. "You're the guy with the shaggy dog." "That's me. He's something. My niece volunteers at the shelter." "Said you saved his life?" I shrugged. "He saved mine too, probably." She handed me the brackets and leaned forward. "You should come to the community event Saturday. Seniors are bringing their adopted dogs for a little meetup. It's nothing big, just some folding chairs and coffee. He doesn't really like crowds. Neither do most of the dogs," she said. "That's the point." Reggie was sitting taller when I got back to the truck, watching the door like he'd already made up his mind. "We've got an invite, buddy," I said. "You feel like being social this weekend?" He sneezed. I took it as a maybe. At home, I noticed the silence again. Not the heavy kind, the kind that had followed Rusty's passing, thick with absence. This was different. Lighter. Comfortable. Like a pause in a story where the best part is just about to begin. Friday night, I gave Reggie another bath. Brushed him out until he looked more dog and less tumbleweed. His coat had grown softer since the day I found him. The patchy spots were filling in. He still had one cloudy eye, but the other gleamed with something new, light, maybe, or trust. "You ready for Saturday?" I asked. He licked his paw and ignored me. Saturday morning came with frost on the windows and the distant rumble of salt trucks. I packed a thermos of coffee and an old quilt for the folding chairs. Reggie climbed into the truck like it was just another errand, but there was a new alertness in his posture, the way his ears turned toward every passing car, the way his tail gave a soft wag when he spotted the rec center. The event was held at the edge of the park, near the old rec center. About a dozen people stood around in coats and scarves, holding leashes or tossing worn tennis balls to dogs who moved like they'd earn every ache in their bones. One dog rode in a custom wheelchair. Another had 3 legs and a swagger that said he didn't need the 4th. I spotted the flannel coat from the park. The man waved. "Glad you came. What's his name again?" "Reggie." He smiled. "Looks better already." We stood together, making small talk, while Reggie sat quietly beside me, observing. He didn't approach anyone. Didn't try to play. But he didn't retreat either. He just existed in the space, calm and steady, like an anchor in a room full of drifting boats. One of the organizers handed me a Polaroid camera. "Mind if we take a picture for the board? We're starting a wall of second chances." I looked at Reggie. "Smile, old man." He didn't, of course. But he looked at the camera with that curious tilt of his head, the same one he'd given me in Kennel 19. They snapped the photo, wrote our names on the bottom, and clipped it to a corkboard under a sign that said, "Found each other." We didn't stay long. After half an hour, Reggie gave me a look, a slow blink, a shift of weight, that clearly meant, "We're done here." On the way home, we stopped at the corner store. I let him pick a toy from the little rack by the register. He sniffed a rubber chicken, a plush squirrel, and finally settled on a stuffed star with a smiley face. I wasn't sure why. But he held it in his mouth all the way to the truck. That night, he lay on the rug, chewing the star slowly, not with excitement, more like he was savoring it. I poured myself a drink and sat down beside him. You know, I said, you could have ended up anywhere. And here we are. He paused, looked up at me, and dropped the toy. Then, for the first time, he did something he hadn't done before. He rested his head in my lap. I sat still, not wanting to ruin the moment. We stayed like that until the ice in my glass melted. Sunday morning, I found myself up too early. Reggie was still asleep, curled tightly in Rusty's old bed. I made coffee, then sat at the kitchen table with the Polaroid from the event. Someone had given me a magnet shaped like a bone, and I stuck the photo to the fridge. I wondered who had loved him before. What kind of life he'd had. What kind of people had given him that tag, those words worn into brass like a promise. Maybe it didn't matter. He was here now. Safe. Warm. Wanted. But the thought lingered. Later that day, I made a call. Hi, I said to the shelter director. Do you still have Reggie's intake records? Not much. Just what was on the tag. Can I see it? The tag, you have it? I mean, the back. We never looked. I checked. The reverse side was nearly worn smooth, but under the right light, I saw it, faint scratches, faded but legible. Not far. An address. 20 miles west. I told Reggie, I said, even though he probably didn't understand. We're going on a road trip tomorrow. He lifted his head just to see. Nothing more. The next morning, we drove west, past the edge of town, through winding back roads lined with frost-dusted fields and skeletal cornstalks. The address led to a farmhouse, not rundown, but not pristine either. Lived in. Loved in. A man in his 70s stepped onto the porch as we pulled in. He leaned on a cane, his face lined with years and quiet sorrow. I got out slowly. Sorry to bother you. I adopted a dog a while back. Found your address on his old tag. The man's face didn't change at first. He's got one cloudy eye. Shaggy coat. Answers to Reggie. The man stepped forward. You brought him? He's in the truck. I opened the door. Reggie sat watching. Then, the old man said one word. Tucker. And Reggie whined. Not a sad sound. Not scared. Just recognition. He stepped out, walked up to the man, sniffed his shoes, and leaned against his leg. The man dropped his cane. Didn't fall, just knelt, both hands in Reggie's fur. He was my son's, he said. We stayed a while. Talked. He told me his boy had died 4 years ago. That he'd tried to keep Tucker, but grief had hollowed him out until he couldn't even feed the dog some days. One morning, Tucker was gone. I figured he was gone for good. He looked at me. You called him Reggie. I nodded. Doesn't matter. He knows you now. Reggie, or Tucker, looked between us. His tail wagged once. On the drive home, he didn't seem confused. Didn't seem torn. Just tired. He curled up in his bed that night and slept like he hadn't in weeks. I looked at the old photo the man had given me, a boy in his 20s, arms around a younger version of Reggie, both smiling like the world was infinite. You were loved, I said softly. He opened one eye and wagged his tail. That night, for the first time, he didn't sleep in the living room. He lay outside my bedroom door. Not inside. Not demanding. Just close enough to know I was there. And I left my door cracked open. No words needed. Just two souls learning to share the same quiet. But something had shifted. Not closure. Not quite. But peace. And in the morning, I opened that saved email draft, the one for the therapy dog program, and hit submit. Reggie's second act was about to begin. But to prepare for it, I had to go back. To Rusty. Not to replace him. Never that. But to honor what he'd started. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the old chest in the garage. It had been Rusty's box. Leashes. Balls. A few drawings from my nephews. And one old yellow raincoat that had never fit any dog quite right. At the bottom, folded carefully, was his therapy vest. Faded blue, the white letters barely legible, Therapy Dog, Rusty. I held it in my hands, feeling the weight of memory. We'd visited the Maple Pines Senior Living together, back when I thought volunteering would stitch my heart back together. It hadn't, not fully. But it had kept me moving. Reggie padded into the garage behind me and sat down beside the box. You ever want a job? I asked, holding up the vest. He sniffed it once, just once, and sat down. Not out of interest. Not out of curiosity. But out of respect. I found myself looking up the local therapy dog program that night. They offered orientations every other month. I filled out the form. Didn't submit it. Just saved it as a draft. Reggie lay beside the couch, head on my socked foot, his breathing slow and even. The next few days passed in their usual rhythm, morning walks, coffee, afternoon porch sitting. But I started noticing how Reggie would pause outside certain houses, always the ones with wind chimes. He'd tilt his head, listening until the sound faded. On Tuesday, I took him back to the park. We passed the bench by the pond. He sniffed it, circled once, then moved on. This time, he didn't stop. He wanted to keep going. I let him lead. We ended up at the small footbridge that crossed the stream at the far end of the trail, somewhere I rarely went. Too quiet. Too far out. Reggie stepped onto the bridge, paused, looked down at the water. Then, he barked. Just once. A sharp, clear sound. I stood beside him and looked down. A duck floated below, just one. Probably late to migrate. Reggie stared at it like it owed him money. I couldn't help but laugh. You tell him. We sat on the bench just past the bridge, the one with the plaque that read, For Those Who Waited. Reggie lay at my feet. I sipped my coffee. The wind picked up a little, carrying the scent of pine. An older man in a jogging suit passed by, slowed, looked at Reggie. That your dog? Yes, sir. He smiled. Looks like someone brought a heart back to life. I nodded. He gave a little wave and kept going. That night, there was a knock at the door. A boy stood there, maybe 16, nervous eyes. He held a brown envelope. Are you the guy with the dog? Reggie? I am. My grandfather said you came by last week. Said you had his son's dog. I nodded. He wrote this for you. Said you should have it. He handed me the envelope and walked off before I could say much. Inside was a letter, handwritten in careful script. He talked about his son, about how they used to go to that same park, about how Reggie, or Tucker, would wait by the front door every evening at 5 o'clock, tail wagging, no matter the weather. He wrote, when I lost my son, I couldn't handle losing the dog too. I made a mistake. I let him go. You gave him what I couldn't. At the bottom, a single line. Thank you for letting an old dog believe again. I folded the letter and placed it in the box with the picture. Reggie nudged my elbow. I scratched his ear. You ready for bed? He stretched, yawned, and wandered down the hall. Later that night, I found him not in his bed, but curled up outside my bedroom door. Maybe it was the letter. Or the memory. Or just the way the wind moved through the trees. But I felt something shift. Not closure. Not quite. But peace. And in the morning, I opened that saved email draft. I hit submit. Reggie's second act was about to begin. The discovery of the tag back address. It started with a glint. Not sunlight off glass or the flash of a passing car. No, this was quieter, subtler. The kind of glint that only appears when you've been looking at the same object for weeks, months, even years, and suddenly you see it differently. I was sitting on the porch one Sunday evening, Reggie curled at my feet, the brass tag around his neck catching the last amber light of dusk. I'd read the front 100 times, If you're reading this, I was loved once. It had become a kind of mantra, a quiet promise, a declaration, a plea all in one. But that night, as I ran my thumb over the cool metal, I turned it over. The back had always seemed blank. Smooth. Worn down by time, weather, and the constant brush of fur. But under the angled light, I saw it, faint scratches. Letters. Faded but deliberate. I leaned closer. Not far. And below it, an address. 20 miles west. My breath caught. Reggie lifted his head, as if he'd felt the shift in my pulse. You knew, I whispered. He blinked once, slow, calm, almost knowing. I'd assumed the tag was just a final message from someone who couldn't bear to let their dog disappear without a word. A poetic farewell. But this was a breadcrumb. A path. I didn't ask if he wanted to go. I already knew. By morning I'd mapped the route, rural roads, 2 county lines, old farmland. The address led to a farmhouse, nothing grand, just a white clapboard house with a sagging porch and smoke curling from the chimney. Reggie rode in the passenger seat, silent as always, but his posture was different. Alert. Not anxious, just focused, like he was tuning into a frequency only he could hear. When we pulled into the gravel drive, an old man stepped onto the porch. Mid-70s, maybe? Worn flannel, a cane in one hand, eyes that had seen more grief than joy. I got out slowly. Sorry to bother you. I adopted a dog a while back. Found your address on his old tag. The man didn't move at first. Just stared. He's got one cloudy eye. I continued. Shaggy coat. Answers to Reggie. The man's breath hitched. You brought him? He's in the truck. I opened the door. Reggie sat watching, ears forward, tail still. Then, the man said one word. Tucker. And Reggie whined. Not out of fear. Not confusion. Just recognition. He stepped out of the truck like he'd done it 1,000 times before, walked up to the man, sniffed his boots, and leaned against his leg. The man dropped his cane. Didn't fall, just knelt, both hands trembling as they buried themselves in Reggie's fur. He was my son's, he said, voice breaking. We stayed a long time. Inside the house, time moved differently. The air smelled of pine resin, old books, and something faintly sweet, cinnamon maybe. Photos lined the walls, a young man with kind eyes and a wide smile, always with a dog at his side. Sometimes on a porch. Sometimes by a lake. Always together. His name was Daniel. He'd died 4 years ago, car accident on a slick road in November. Left behind a wife who'd moved west, a father who stayed, and a dog who waited. For weeks after, the old man said, staring into his coffee, Tucker sat by the door every evening at 5. Tail wagging. Like Danny was just running late. His voice cracked. I couldn't feed him some days. Couldn't look at him without seeing my boy. One morning, he was gone. He looked at me then, eyes glistening. I thought he'd been picked up by animal control. Or worse. I figured he was gone for good. I didn't know what to say, so I said the only true thing. He saved me too. The man nodded like he understood. Before we left, he handed me a photo, Daniel and Tucker, arms around each other, both smiling like the world had no end. On the back, written in blue ink, * best friends. Always, *. On the drive home, Reggie didn't sleep. He watched the road, ears perked, as if memorizing every turn, every landmark. He didn't seem torn between lives, just complete. Like a circle had finally closed. That night, I placed the photo on my bookshelf, right beside Rusty's collar. I didn't change his name. I thought about calling him Tucker, out of respect, out of history. But when I said Tucker aloud, he didn't turn. When I said, Reggie, his ear flicked. So Reggie he stayed. Not because the past didn't matter, but because he'd chosen this life, with me. And that choice meant more than any name ever could. The next morning, I opened the therapy dog application I'd saved months ago. I hit submit. His second act was about to begin. The orientation was held at the community center, a modest brick building between the post office and an insurance agency. Folding chairs lined the walls. A coffee urn hissed in the corner. Half a dozen dogs lay at their owner's feet, each one older than the next, a pug with clouded eyes, a shepherd with a limp, a terrier missing an ear. Reggie walked in like he belonged. Not with pride, just presence. He paused briefly to sniff the pug, who gave a half-hearted tail wag. Then he sat beside me, calm, alert, utterly unbothered when a stack of handouts crashed to the floor. "He's got good control," said a woman with silver hair and bright red glasses. She handed me a clipboard. "We keep it informal today. Just want to see how he handles stimulation." For the next hour, we moved through stations. One had a vacuum cleaner running at low volume. Reggie walked past without even glancing. Another featured a child-sized doll in a wheelchair, part of a simulation to practice reading and petting with patience. Reggie approached, sat, and gently rested his chin on the footrest. "You didn't train him for this?" the red glasses woman asked. "Nope," I said. "He trained me." By the end, they gave us a blue vest, soft fabric, white letters, therapy dog, in training. Our first assignment, the public library. It was a reading program for children with anxiety or speech delays. The idea was simple: kids read aloud to dogs. No judgment. No corrections. Just a quiet listener. I wasn't sure. Reggie had never been around groups of children, not really. Just that one moment with the boy and the ice cream. But when I clipped on his vest that morning, he stood taller. Like he understood. The library corner was bright, bean bags, dog-themed books, a sign that read, "Pause for reading." Caleb was the first to sit across from us. He couldn't have been more than 8. His hands shook as he held his book. He glanced at Reggie, then at the floor. "Hi," he whispered. Reggie blinked. Caleb began to read, slow, stumbling over words like they were traps. I stayed silent. Reggie didn't move. By the 5th page, Caleb's voice was steadier. By the end, he looked up and smiled. "I think he listened." "I know he did," I said. Each week after that we returned. Different kids. Different books. But always the same quiet presence from Reggie. He didn't do tricks. Didn't wag on command. Just stayed, steady, kind, unshakable. Word spread. A local newspaper photographer showed up one day. "Mind if I take a picture?" he asked. "Flash off," I said. The next morning, Reggie was on the front page of the local section, asterisk. "Old dog, new tricks, how one senior pup is changing lives." Asterisk. The mailman laughed when he handed me the paper. "You're much famous now." I framed the clipping. Reggie sniffed it once, unimpressed. We added a nursing home to our rotation, Maple Pines Senior Living. Reggie walked through the common room like a mayor accepting quiet greetings. But there was one man he always stopped for, George. George sat by the window. Never spoke. Never smiled. Reggie would sit beside him, lean against his leg, and stay the entire visit. One day, I overheard a nurse whisper, "He hasn't let anyone sit near him in months." The next week, as we turned to leave, George said one word. "Thanks." I didn't know if it was for me or Reggie. But either way, it stuck. At home, Reggie was still the same quiet soul. He liked the sound of guitar. I dug out my old one, and he'd lie near the amp while I fumbled through chords. My brother visited once with his boys, wild, loud, full of energy. When the youngest tripped and skinned his knee, Reggie was the first beside him, nose nudging his arm until the tears stopped. "Your dog's got a heart," my brother said. "Yeah," I replied. "He borrowed it from someone. Now he's sharing it." That night, for the first time, Reggie slept at the foot of my bed. He stayed until dawn. We visited the shelter again, not as adopters, but as volunteers. Reggie walked the kennels beside me, occasionally stopping to wag gently at a nervous dog behind the fence. He paused at Kennel 7. Inside was a golden Labrador, cloudy eyes, patchy coat, tail still. "Her name's Mags," a volunteer said. "No one's looked at her in 2 months." Reggie sat down in front of the kennel. and refused to move. "Someone's trying to make a point," I said. The next week, Mags had a home, with Paul, a retired bus driver who'd just lost his wife. Reggie was there the day Paul picked her up. The two dogs touched noses. Mags wagged. In the truck on the way home, I scratched behind Reggie's ear. "You're matchmaking now?" He gave a contented huff. Spring melted into summer. The porch grew thick with pollen. Reggie took to lying in the shade beneath the maple tree, watching me mow the lawn like an old farmer surveying his land. One evening, I found a crayon drawing in the mail, Reggie next to a stick figure labeled asterisk. "Me and my reading buddy." Asterisk signed Caleb. I stuck it to the fridge. Some nights, I'd find Reggie staring out the window, ears alert but body still. I'd sit beside him, matching his quiet. Whatever he saw out there, it was his business. I stopped wondering how long he'd be with me. Stopped counting days. Because every day felt full. Not flashy. Not grand. Just full. And somehow, that was more than enough. He was a dog rejected by every family, until one old brass tag turned everything around. And now, he was turning things around for everyone else. Reggie had a way of making strangers act like neighbors. He didn't do much to earn it, no tricks, no showmanship, not even a bark most days. But he made people pause, look twice, and soften. That's a rare talent in a world that rushes past everything it can't label or sell. It had been nearly 4 months since I found him in Kennel 19. And in that time, our days had slipped into a rhythm that felt permanent in all the best ways. Mornings, slow coffee for me, soft chews for him. He no longer followed me from room to room like he was afraid I'd disappear. Now, he just waited, eyes half closed, tail thumping lazily when he heard me coming. Our therapy visits became sacred. Mondays at the library, Wednesdays at Maple Pines, and now, Fridays at the Veterans Center downtown. New territory. The first time we walked in, Reggie sat down and looked around like he'd been there before. A man named Hal met us at the door, deep voice, slow walk, fatigue jacket worn like a second skin. "So you're the famous Reggie," he said, kneeling. Reggie met him halfway, nose against knuckles. Hal looked up at me. "He always this calm?" "Pretty much." "Good. Some of the guys in here haven't had calm in a long time." The center smelled like coffee and old leather. Men sat in recliners, some napping, some playing solitaire. When Reggie approached a bearded veteran at the corner table, the man looked up, but didn't speak. Reggie just sat beside him. Quiet. Still. After a few minutes, the man said, "You here to listen or judge?" Reggie blinked. "Good," the man said. "Me too." By the time we left, the staff had already asked when we'd come back. "We'll be here every Friday," I said, "until someone tells us otherwise." Reggie wagged once, as if confirming the contract. Back home, the garden needed tending. I spent Saturday digging out weeds while Reggie supervised from the shade. A neighbor, Lucas, a college kid home for summer, stopped by. "You mind if I pet him?" "Not at all. Just go slow." Lucas crouched. Reggie lifted his head, gave a lazy sniff. "He doesn't even flinch. He doesn't see much point in wasting energy." Lucas laughed. "I wish I could be that calm." He stayed a while, talking about finals, uncertainty, the weight of not knowing what comes next. Reggie didn't move, but his presence seemed to steady the conversation. Like it was safe to admit you didn't have it all figured out. After Lucas left, I sat on the back steps. "You're some kind of magnet," I said. His ears twitched. "You just pulled the truth out of people." He gave a soft grunt and stretched across the warm wood. Sunday brought rain, the kind that drummed softly on the roof and made everything smell like earth. Reggie didn't get up until noon. I joined him on the couch with a book I'd started weeks ago. He curled beside me, snoring before I reached the second chapter. That afternoon, I went through old boxes in the attic. Found an album labeled North Ridge Cabin. Photos of me, my brother, our dad, and Rusty, barely a pup, bounding through snowbanks like he was chasing clouds. There was one of him lying by the fireplace, tongue out, eyes half closed. I carried it downstairs. That was Rusty, I told Reggie, tapping the page. He sniffed it, then rested his chin on the album. The next morning, I called my brother. You think the cabin's still standing? It was last time we checked. Why? Thinking about taking Reggie up there. You sure it's a bit of a hike? He can handle it. We left at dawn. Back roads that grew narrower with each mile. By noon, we reached the trailhead. I clipped Reggie's leash. Ready to see something new? He sniffed the air, and took the lead. The hike was slow. We stopped often, not because Reggie was tired. He thrived on the fresh air. But because my knees weren't what they used to be. We made it. The cabin was still there, hidden behind overgrowth, wood faded to gray, door creaking the same way it always had. Inside, dust blanketed everything. But the structure held. Reggie explored every inch. Sniffed under the old table. Circled the fireplace. Then lay down in the exact spot where Rusty had in that photo. I lit a small fire. Made soup. Sat in the creaky armchair by the window. Reggie lay with his head on my foot, just like at home. That night, the stars came out in clusters, unbothered by city light. I stepped onto the porch with Reggie and looked up. You've come a long way, I said. He didn't move. Just leaned against my leg. In the morning, we walked to the creek. Reggie stepped into the water like he'd done it his whole life. Lapped at the current. Then pounced at a floating leaf, like a puppy. I hadn't seen him move like that before. Not once, I called. You've still got it! He barked, short, surprised. Then another. I laughed until my sides hurt. We stayed another night. Just us. The fire. The woods. And when we came down the mountain, something had shifted again. Not dramatically. Just like a page turning. A new chapter starting. Back home, I hung the photo of Rusty in the cabin next to Caleb's drawing of Reggie. Different dogs. Different years. Same feeling. That week at Maple Pines, George was waiting with a new chair cushion. Thought he might like it, he said, holding it out like an offering. Reggie took his place beside him. At the library, Caleb read 2 full books without stumbling. He's my lucky charm, he said. Reggie wagged once. Friday at the Veterans Center, Hal told me. Reggie should have his own nameplate. He's not just a dog anymore, he said. He's a regular. So we made one. A little wood plaque. It read, Reggie the Listener. We hung it above the chair he always claimed. I found myself looking at that plaque a lot. Wondering what it meant to really listen. To sit quietly in someone else's space and offer nothing but presence. It wasn't easy. But Reggie made it look like breathing. And more people started sitting down beside him. People who didn't talk much. People who hadn't been seen in a long time. And there Reggie sat. Always steady. Always there. Waiting.